How are you, brother? Good to see you.
Nice to see you. I'd shake. Okay, everyone. It's about 11:03. I think we need to get rolling. We got a lot to cover. So let me know if we're live.
Councilor Romero Worth, we're live.
Terrific. So at 11:04, I'm calling to order the Finance Committee meeting for today, April 24th. This is the first day of the FY26 budget hearings. And if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly, Madam Chair. Councillor Cassett.
Here.
Councillor Lindell. Councillor Faulkner.
Here.
Councillor Lee Garcia.
Here.
Chair Romero Worth. Madam Chair, you have a quorum.
I am present. Okay, we have an agenda for every day that we are gathering. Today's agenda, are there any changes from staff?
Madam Chair, we have one small change that we're requesting to change the order of
Okay.
the economic update and have that be before the budget overview.
Okay. And with that, is there a motion?
Motion to approve as amended.
As amended.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to move our agenda around to put the economic outlook first and to approve the rest of the agenda. I guess I can do this by roll call. We don't have anybody on Zoom today, right? So all those in favor, aye. Anyone opposed? That motion passes. Chair's opening remarks. All I want to say is welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to this yearly check-in that we do around our budget. And I want to thank all of our staff, and particularly the budget staff and the finance department. And this is a lot of work to get to this moment. And it's very important. It sets the priorities and the work for the coming fiscal year. And it's very important work. It's a lot of work. And I just want to say thank you to all who touch this. And it's certainly the leadership of the budget folks, but in the finance department, but then every team across the city works on this to develop priorities and to come up with what we will be reviewing in the next week or so. It's going to be a little bit more than a week. So welcome, everyone. And with that, I think we can go to Dr. Riley White, who is our contracted economist, to give us the economic update for this session. And I guess I didn't tell anybody I was going to do this, but it might be important. Director Oster, can you or whoever thinks this might be important, why Dr. Riley's presentation is an important one, why we have him on contract, why we bring him here to give us a big picture view of the economy in which we operate as a city government, and how that informs the decisions we make and what we're doing here. And Director Oster, I think you can do that. If the city manager would rather, or the mayor, that's fine too. And I guess also I forgot to welcome the mayor. Hello, Mayor. Thanks for joining us. And I forgot to welcome the city manager as well. So sorry about that. Anyway, if you want to take a crack at that question, it'd be great.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Riley White to join us for an economic update today. As we dive into the budget process, it's very important that we understand the context that we're operating within. And Dr. White brings an extremely valuable perspective in terms of what economic conditions are telling us about what we can expect for revenues in FY26. So when we're building our budget, we make our best estimate about what we think the level of revenue we're going to see in FY26 is, and we build our budget based on that. And Dr. White plays a key role in helping us read the tea leaves, so to speak, to try to make our best estimate about what revenues will materialize in FY26. Dr. White is a professor at the University of New Mexico, and he joins us in his capacity as a consultant to advise the city on both macro and microeconomic factors that we need to consider in our revenue forecasting. And with that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to turn it over to Dr. White to perhaps give a little bit more detail on his background and his specific expertise.
Welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, councilors. Thank you so much, mayor, city managers, and especially the budget team for their amazing work and flexibility during this time of uncertainty. So my background, this is now, I think, my 18th year.
I want to make sure that you're speaking into that mic.
I'm sorry, let me get real close.
Yeah, so the other thing is you're relatively tall. I'd recommend putting it up there on the edge, lift it up there, and then there you go. Then you don't have to bend to it, it'll bend to you.
There it is. It was just,
Yeah, and you really keep it close to you because while I can hear you in the chamber, anybody who's watching on Zoom now or later won't be able to hear you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. This is much better. So yes, now I've gotten, this is my 18th year doing this. I'm a tenured faculty member at University of New Mexico, as well as an associate dean. I've been doing consulting work in this line of work for almost that entire time, about 18 years or so. Following markets doing this, I come from the private sector originally in the banking industry prior to 2008. Graduated, got my PhD from the University of Connecticut. Came out here to live in New Mexico, where I've been for the last 13 years. My family was out. Grandparents lived in Las Cruces. Coming home to New Mexico was always my goal. So I have a full 48-page CV that is a great thing to read if you want to put your kids to sleep or do other things with it, but it's super fun. So we have a lot of things today, and I'm going to do, and I know you have an extensive meeting today, so I won't take up too much of your time. I'm jazzed to talk a little bit about this topic today and give you some context as to this very uncertain time that we're in and how to make sense of some of these big picture measures that we're taking a look at. So here in the city of Santa Fe, our macroeconomic update, I'm going to focus first on the next slide, which is the macroeconomic overview. And there are some things that I want to point out that are the big picture. So obviously, we know the writing on the wall. We watch the news. We see these things. What is the sense of this? Markets have been uncertain. Policy has been uncertain. Presidential policy has been uncertain. As a consequence, consumer sentiment. What we poll consumers to say, how confident are you in looking at the economy? And this is predictive. The more confident consumers are, the more comfortable they are at spending money. This has fallen off very recently on a kind of continuous pattern since 2020. We never really recovered our pre-COVID certainty. And despite that, we had some very robust consumer spending dominate markets in the last few years. Why is consumer spending? Oh, I'm so sorry.
Hold on a second. I'm sorry.
Sir Lindell.
Thank you. Do we have this in a packet anywhere?
You do. It's in your today's agenda.
Oh, my apologies.
Sorry about that.
No problem. And why do we focus on consumer sentiment? It predicts spending. Why is spending important? It's 2/3 of our GDP, about 69%. In fact, of our economy, our growth is derived from people just spending money. And so it becomes a really good bellwether of what's going to happen, particularly as we focus on revenues like GRT. Now, there has been a detachment in the last few years. Usually this was a very predictive way to look at this. Now it's kind of gone a little bit the other way, where even though consumer sentiment has gone down, people have still been spending money. I have another slide where I will explain that because it depends on the type of consumer. But recently, because of this, we are seeing a continued downward trend in consumer sentiment. Also, GDP right now, our gross domestic product, the goods and services produced in the United States, is tracking negative across the first quarter, or the data for the first quarter was tracking negative to about negative 2.8% in data from the Federal Reserve. This is significant, but it's also a function of math. So we think about what an economy does and what an economy produces, how much goods it has, and it's really a formula. But the aspect, what happened uniquely in the first quarter of this year was people were really worried about tariffs. So companies who buy a lot of things overseas, about 61% of our imports are what we call intermediate goods, stuff that goes in to build other stuff, bought a whole bunch of inventory early this year. And that led us to have the biggest trade deficit we've ever had. And this GDP is tracking because it's measuring that trade deficit. It's money that's going out to spend stuff abroad. Personal consumption is starting to cool, specifically among middle and lower income households. About 50% of spending in this country is spent by the top 10% of households by income. And outlook, and you've seen this across numerous economists, financial projections, large firms. Everyone has upped their odds of a recession in the next year. 6 months ago to a year ago, we would say this was a very low chance. Nowadays, you have everybody weighing in from JP Morgan to Bloomberg to other things, looking at anywhere between a 25% and 60% chance of a recession. But we know from predictions in the past that predicting a recession or saying the odds are higher doesn't will it to be. And so let's talk more about some of these other issues. Tariffs are a big question. And I think one of the trade policy issues that we're grappling with is just what that means. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide, a couple of slides down the line. I think we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So real-time GDP growth in the US economy, this is from the Fed, see very distinctly that when the trade policy or when the trade tariffs were announced at the end of February, it is no coincidence that a whole bunch of economic data, this is a chart that tracks real-time economic data and then applies it to a GDP model. And this is from the Federal Reserve. And you can see right about the 28th of February, from the Atlanta Fed GDP Now estimate just completely tanked. It went from about a 2% growth rate to about a 2.5% decline. And it stayed that way. And this is based off of, again, companies responding to these tariffs or this stricter trade policy. Tariffs are complex things, right? So we know tariffs are taxes on goods that we import, but more effectively, what does it do? It raises the cost of acquiring those goods from other countries. We know from a lot of different economic research, economic surveys, that tariffs generally have an aggregate negative effect on the overall economy. And we can point to different cases. 2009, the tariffs on Chinese tires is a good example. We raised tariffs to 35% on tires from China. As a result, the price of Chinese tires went up 25%, but the price of all tires also went up 3%. There was less competition in this market and the prices rose. And because the prices rose, people bought fewer tires. So yes, we saved about 1,300 tire jobs, but lost about 4,000 retail jobs on the other side. We can point to the steel tariffs and steel, tariffs and other things as well that have done those things. And so tariffs as a whole create some expenses that companies are trying to account for in different ways. And one way they did so in this first quarter was they wanted to buy all the stuff abroad early so they weren't exposed to that tariff. And we had this really big, really big trade deficit in the first quarter. And that's what's dragged down the GDP. So the hard part about this is this doesn't mean we're in a recession, but it does indicate if this persists month after month after month, if this results in job shortages, which we haven't seen yet, or job issues or job losses of magnitude, which we haven't seen yet. We've been following a lot of different unemployment trackers and other things, and we're not there yet. If it falls off the ladder, or it seems to indicate we're kind of waiting in anticipation for other economic data that's coming out in the next few months. So it's possible we will see this. It's possible it will be gradual, but overall, the overall tendency is to look at this as a warning sign in the economy as a whole. Now, on the next slide, please. There are some factors at play. One thing is the experience of consumers in the economy is different. Right now, the top 10% of earners account for half of all spending. That's important in Santa Fe. We are a tourist economy. That means that we have a lot of tourists, and a lot of those tourists come from the upper 10% of expenditure. And so far, they've been keeping a lot of the economy elevated, when a lot of people, especially in the middle income areas and lower income areas, have been really feeling and cutting back some of their expenditures. Here in New Mexico, and this is hard to see, especially if in the cheap seats, but this is the average credit card debt by state. In New Mexico, we have about $6,500 of average credit card debt. That is highly significant. So at least a percentage of the consumer body is feeling this distress. And that is a sizable amount. That is indeed one of the most common and most expensive forms of consumer debt that you can take out, because often credit card interest rates exceed 20% higher. Next slide, please. Coming down the big picture, let's talk about tariffs. So the interesting part about trade policy. Now, let's comment about a few of this, and there's been many commentators around this overall, trying to fit it into a logical spectrum, right? We know I mean, you can bring up me, you can replace me with any other finance or economics person, and we'll say basically the same thing. Tariffs in general are bad. But let's think. So what is the picture of tariffs and why is this an important thing now and how should we think about it? So right now, the United States maintains relatively low tariffs in general across most goods. So if you wanted to buy things overseas for cheaper for your company, or you wanted to buy things overseas in general as a consumer, you generally have a more or less open market as kind of a policy in the last 30 or 40 years. Now, this has benefited economic growth in aggregate. It's also been unequal in its distribution of those rewards, and that's important to acknowledge. And the trade policy right now is adjusting to a change of regime. So where the United States would pursue trade policies that advocated larger and open and free trade arrangements, right now we're in a situation where there's great uncertainty. The president has increased trade tariffs to such a level. I suspect to crack new deals with individual countries over trade, but the unknown quantity is, well, we already have those deals more or less in place. And will this ultimately benefit U.S. workers or benefit the U.S. is a very challenging question to answer. Paradoxically, the Financial Times had this manufacturing visualization up here on the left. The question is, of course, so when polled, when Americans are asked this question, would we be better off if more of us worked in manufacturing? 80% of us, regardless of political parties, say, yes, of course. It'd be better if we had more manufacturing in the United States. But then if we ask people individually, would you feel better about working in a manufacturing job? Only 20% of Americans feel that. And so this is part of that dialogue and discrepancy that's taking place. And it also leads to the question of, if our commitment is to onshoring jobs and having all these effects, will those jobs be filled by people or will they be filled by automation? Or will it actually ironically accelerate the questions around automation? And if you look to the right, this is the average effective tariff rate by industry, both looking at the 2024 levels, which are dark blue, the January through March tariffs as they were announced in the April 9th announcement from the president. And overall, the tariffs vary significantly by industry, but you can see these levels are significantly higher. So tariffs mean it costs you more to import goods to put into your machines, your factories, your cars, and other things. And as a consequence, where that money, what's going to happen to that often gets passed down to consumers in the form of higher prices. This is important because when we think about what the Federal Reserve is doing right now, they're judging continuously on economic data. Do we lower rates or do we increase rates in the economy? And that has many, many long-lasting effects. The Federal Reserve has one big job, one big task in setting the discount rate, and that's overnight lending to large banks, but all those other interest rates followed. So if we say, in this particular case, the Fed seeks a dual mandate, which is full employment as well as they seek full employment as well as inflation at or around 2%. What tariffs do is they put pressure on inflation going upward. And if inflation rises, the Fed is going to be less keen on lowering interest rates for normal Americans. And this is very, very key to point out. So it's a bit of a balance. And our big fear in relationship economically with the question of tariffs is it creates a form of what we call stagflation light. You're keeping economic growth low, but at the same time, prices seem to be rising nonetheless. Usually what happens is in a very robust economy, prices have an incentive to increase, prices rise, and then as a consequence, the Fed raises rates to cool down the economy. And if you have an economy that is already cool, it makes it hard to raise rates accordingly, and then you make it more difficult for people to do business. And when you raise rates, you think it makes it more expensive for companies to expand, for people to take out mortgages, for things to happen because those rates are tied together, even though, of course, mortgages follow the 10-year rate. And so the big uncertainty is whether it will look like this, the blue line, or whether this will be pushed back. And the longer tariffs exist and the higher levels tariffs exist, the more negative economic effects take place. And so if this is indeed a ploy to create a better trade policy, the best outcome is we crack a number of different trade deals that puts us closer to where we were before. And maybe the economic effects aren't great, but the average time to make a trade deal is around 13 months. So all of these things are important factors and seem to be important in bringing down this year's particular estimated GDP. And that is, we're going to talk about the effects of that. Next slide, please. A lot of complex stuff, and please interject if there's any questions. As a silly question, this stuff is technical and it can be a little much at times. So the odds of a downturn are significantly higher. This is what this means. So if you look on the left, you have a chart showing Goldman Sachs and Bloomberg. Goldman Sachs in red, Bloomberg in blue. I mean, historically, they called for, Bloomberg famously called for a recession in 2023. It didn't happen. Nowadays, both those levels have increased to about 30% and 45%. On the right, you have JP Morgan's logic. They have run a kind of a decision tree on where they think the economy will go. Looking at the question of a global recession is about 40%. And then there's just a US recession at an additional 20%. And then the question of really, are we going to see a strong economy like we've seen in the last few years down to about 5%? So that becomes an issue to consider. Next slide, please, as well. So equity sentiment right now, and one predictor for people. So one of the questions is, so if we know that 10% of US consumers are responsible for 50% of spending, how is their spending correlated? What are they driven by? And people spend more when they feel more wealthy. And what makes them feel more wealthy is if they have a lot of money in stocks and retirement plans and things like this. And so we've seen kind of a pullback in markets lately. And the market performance is often very important as an indicator of how we expect spending will run. So equity sentiment, of course, is running negative right now, and that's possible. Even though we've seen a lot of volatility in the market in the last, on a day-to-day basis, we've seen volatility at about the top 2% level that we've seen in the last 90 years. So it is unusually volatile right now in the markets. But there's also things at play. So because the markets have done really well in the last few years, people have spent a lot of money. And as a consequence, if we look at one of the ways that we decide if something might be overvalued or undervalued in the stock market is looking at the price to earnings ratio, how much higher the price is over what the company actually makes. So based on sort of price to earnings historically, Vanguard came out, and that's the chart at the right. Also, again, tough to read in the cheap seats, but the most alarming part of their US equity forecast is they're expecting stocks to rise just about 3.9% a year over the next year. That is not a lot of money. That is actually, on average, the stock market is expected to be about 8%, 9%, 10% or higher if we look at just equities. And so that is interesting, and that is driven by a chart that I didn't include here that is just, financial crunching numbers that we all know about. If we look at the price to earnings ratio as a predictive element, what we look at is when it's this high, it's not predictive for next year's stock return, but it's really predictive for years of stock return. And so that's where they're coming from with these values. And so that is a concern when we look at the question of can consumer spending keep hoisting up the US economy. So next slide. So bring it a little bit closer to home. So one of the things is home demand in general. So interest rates have remained high and mortgage rates have remained high with them. They're finally starting to drop in home prices. We've seen in Santa Fe a leveling off of home prices. And if we look at builders in particular, D.R. Horton's data is up there on the left. We can see that they're pulling back on a lot of orders. The orders for new homes have been dropping precipitously, about 25 to 22%, 25% in the Southeast and 23% in the Southwest. Now, those affect really big home markets as well as really small ones. Here in New Mexico, you can see kind of in that chart, it's very, very faint, but again, if you can't see it particularly well, Zillow's forecast on property across the country is supposed to drop on average about 2% in the next year. Here in New Mexico, we're about at that level. They expect it to be fairly level or potentially drop. The markets that saw a lot of building have seen potential price drops in the next year, as well as markets that are in highly expensive markets across the West in places, especially the coastal areas of California. Next slide, please. And bringing it even more localized, and here in Santa Fe, I'm looking at a few different metrics of real estate prices. Median sale price in Santa Fe on single-family homes on Redfin was $612,000. And if you can imagine that and compare that to our average household income, you get a sense that it is an unaffordable situation. Here in New Mexico, the average median price is more like $371,000. Of note, though, is that chart on the bottom. This shows you how many days houses are left on the market once they're put on the market. How many days is it until a house is sold? And we've seen, interestingly, across the country, one of the signs that we're actually weakening in real estate now is the amount of homes that are left on the market for a long period of time has been increasing. Here in Santa Fe, it's about 108 days on average on median, and that is significantly higher than where we were just a few months ago, where we were pulling typically the 40 to 50 day range. And so this is expected to continue to be an issue in the coming month. Next one, please. Next slide, please. So we always talk about rents. I think rents are a critical portion as well, because it says, can we afford to live in Santa Fe? Used a couple of different sources here for this one. Right now, the average rent in Santa Fe, with all the building, we increase supply, and does that affect rents? It does. It is choppy, but overall, the average apartment rents end up being still very expensive, around $2,200 per month. And the rent ranges in Santa Fe, if I use a different source, and so they both use two separate rental sources. If I use a different source, you kind of get similar information, where there's about a third of properties that are at least 2,000 and above, and then a very small amount that we would call in the affordable range for individuals. One source, though, is that even though these have been leveling off, they still remain at an elevated rate. So how does this pull together with GRT? And that's my next and penultimate slide. So one of the things, one of my great joys is we build models. We build models to predict GRT and other things. Sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're less accurate. But in essence, what we do is try to fit a range between a low and a high, a low estimate and a high estimate, as well as a median estimate. So we look at a bunch of different economic variables. We know from historical data, and what we do is we take a bunch of historical data for Santa Fe, and then we measure and say, what are the big factors? What drives GRT revenue? It's population growth, it's income, it's tourism, it's all this stuff, all that stuff put together. And we find the variables that actually are significant. And these variables then we use to predict and say, hey, is this going to be this or this in the coming years? And so running this way, one thing that I've done is particularly scaled and thought about the negative consequences. What are the worst things that can happen in the next few years? What are the best things that can happen in the next few years? What is the most likely scenario? And the most likely scenario for GRT is actually a continued slower than previously increased, but a continued slow uptick. And this is driven by population, people wanting to move here, people continuing to be part of the Santa Fe economy, and also because it has been robust in past recessions, apart from the COVID recession, which was uniquely targeted at the tourism market, to which we rely on in Santa Fe. Other recessions show GRT losses are much more modest by comparison. Now, if we had a standard non-tourist based shock to the economy, a recession in some way, what could be expected? And this low estimate kind of is a predictor of that. You're still tracking ahead for this year. But if we were looking at it this way, this would be an example of a period of economic malaise in this low estimate for a number of years. Population's continuing to rise, but economic growth remains very, very low. I consider this is really a 10th percentile outcome. This would be tariffs, high tariffs, restrictionist trade policy, in a way that the president made no concerted effort to correct and economically, or there were no economic stimuli that would come out of Congress or something that would potentially benefit the economy. It is a possibility, but not one that I would view with immense abandonment. But I think when we look at it this way, and even a decline in GDP is, so what we have is, we'll have inflationary pressure that raises the price of goods. That brings in more GRT revenue, but we'll have fewer people buying those goods. And we'll have more people in the city because of population growth. But then we'll have fewer people spending less money on average, or maybe the tourism market finally drops. Looking at tourism numbers and looking at flight numbers and other things, we're just not seeing that data through yet. But in this situation, you're at 169 this year, maybe looking at a 2 or 3% drop in the worst scenario, but still maintaining a 165 base case before ending up a little bit higher as we approach 2031. In the high estimate, this is a blip in the horizon, and you continue to proceed as you've done the last few years, and you're hitting 200 million in GRT revenue in a few years. I think it's much more likely something like the left, a period of slow growth followed by recalibration that will happen when different economic incentives are applied. It is uncertain to know how this will behave, but I think that there is still much to look at from a budgeting perspective. But overall, that is the sense of how we're looking at the models and how we're making these projections. And I did my best to be ultimately very conservative in the low estimate. Tracking data back even to the last two recessions. Coming down to the next slide, the final one, the second final one. So here in Santa Fe, of course, we have some interesting aspects to our local job market. We have our unemployment rate is unique to the state in the sense that it rises in summer because we have an influx of summer workers who look for jobs. To be counted as an unemployed worker, you have to be looking for work. And we have an influx as it rises in summer, and often we reach sort of a nadir in the first parts of the year during our slower season. And so right now we've seen that, but like the rest of the economy, we're still tracking up slightly above levels we've seen before. Looking at a different way to look at the economy overall across the state of New Mexico, apart from a few rural counties, we've seen gradual increases in the unemployment rate. That means more unemployed New Mexicans. In Santa Fe, it's been muted about 0.2% compared to some other counties. Taos is up about 0.4%. Colfax and Lincoln County in particular, Lincoln having been beset by natural disasters as well, is up by 1.1%. And so we expect this to continue. We expect these things to continue and proceed. Consumer credit quality is continuing to decline. We ask, is this a time when are we going to unleash an increased expansion? Well, when we get the data that shows that consumer confidence is rising and consumer credit quality is rising and defaults are getting lower or have peaked, then we can make the argument and say we're getting to that point, but we're not there yet. And so we're still on this sort of very, very subtle downward trajectory right now that is that might change in the event of an economic shock. Okay. Overall assessment. Any question?
Questions from the committee? Doesn't look that way. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Councilor Romero-Worth. Thank you so much for your presence today and all you're doing for the city. If there are any follow-up questions, please let me know. And it's a great joy as always to be in front of this audience. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, we are on to our budget overview and just a couple things, my bad. I didn't welcome the committee who will be sitting and doing a lot of hard work over the next week or so. And I also want to welcome Councilor Castro, who, while she does not sit on the Finance Committee, is certainly a member of the governing body and has joined us today. So welcome, Councilor Castro. I believe the next item is our city manager with the overview of the budget. I did want to just pause for a second and again, welcome the mayor. And Mayor, I don't know if you wanted to say a few words either before or after Mr. Scott's presentation. After? Okay. All right. So we'll reserve a little bit of time for that. And yes, Councilor Lindell.
Just in terms of timing and schedule, we're scheduled to have a noon to 1 o'clock break, correct?
I should have said that also. So we are going to take a lunch break every day. It is not a scheduled break, and I think that's kind of good for some, not so good for others. Since we didn't start till 11, I was thinking maybe we'd take it at 1, but I guess I would defer to the committee just because we do have a number of folks in the audience to talk to us and some things we need to get through, and we did wait to start.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that the schedule did call for a noon to 1.
We didn't schedule one. We will take a lunch break every day, and we will leave it a little bit up to how we're moving through our agenda. And I'm hoping that what we can do is sort of, get through, if we can get through about half of our agenda and then take a lunch break. And in most days, I think it will be around noon, but since we started late today, I would like to go till 1 if possible. Okay. Maybe you can join us on Zoom.
Zoom.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, Mr. Scott, welcome.
Okay, I'm gonna try to make this work this time. It'll be my first successful use of this microphone.
Just keep it close to you.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, we put some slides up on the screen. I apologize that my slides tend to be very primitive. And but I was trying to put slides up there that would be readable. And now that I see it, I'm not sure how readable, but I did provide hard copies to all of you. So hopefully that'll make it a little easier to read. What my goal is, just like we had a presentation by economists about global and national statewide trends, I'm trying to do overview of what the local situation is, the Santa Fe city situation is as we go into this budget year. I do want to say at the outset that I appreciate that we have a budget team with the experience on doing budgets here that saw the need this year as they started to make sure that they brought in as tight a budget as they could bring. And with the national economy the way it is, I think that was insightful on their part to start the budget year that way. And I say that because they actually scrubbed, and that's a technical budget term, scrubbed the budgets from the last years to make sure that the budgets that got delivered to departments as base budgets were as tight as they could reasonably make them. So for instance, they removed as many one-time expenditures as they thought were reasonable to eliminate. And they actually took 3-year averages on many of the line item budget lines to make sure that we weren't budgeting just at the high end, but we were budgeting on something that was more reasonable as a 3-year average. Had we not done that, this budget would have been very difficult to bring in as a balanced budget because revenue projections just aren't as strong as they've been in the past. So the first slide, what I want to do is I want to walk through some of the assumptions that go into the budget and some of the trends and some of the circumstances that we face, that the city council faces as you go forward trying to adopt a budget. I always think it's important for an elected body to have the full context of the budget. When you review a budget, especially city budgets, where we're so busy in so many different areas, it's easy to budget department by department, but really you need to do that with an understanding of the full context. So my comments, and I don't think I'll take long on this, but my comments are focused on what's the big context, what's the overall context within which you're going to be making those individual decisions. So when we start with assumptions, we realized this year that GRT was going to be a challenge. We've got in the budget a 5.9% assumed increase. I was glad to see in the presentation you just heard that they actually predicted a median growth that was higher than what we budgeted. So our budget projection was conservative vis-a-vis the analysis that has been done. However, with the economy the way it is, we don't know that it's even going to make it to that level. Interestingly, in a sad way, our property tax actually, the general fund part of it, 17.7% increase. That's the good news. The bad news, of course, is we don't get much of it. Most of the property tax goes to the county and to the schools. So it's better than nothing, but it isn't a source that supports the city as much. Lodgers tax, 5.6% increase. Everybody's worried whether that'll sustain. Lodgers tax is not in New Mexico used for general fund purposes. So that's a limitation, but we're certainly glad to get what we get. And we're glad that the economy there has been good up to this point, and we hope it stays that way. The emergency reserve that this city maintains is very positive. As you all know, I've been in a lot of cities, and few of my cities have managed to maintain the 20% standard that the Government Finance Officers Association recommends that cities maintain. So the $30 million emergency reserve is definitely a positive for our city. We knew going into this budget that we had a second year of the city's commitment to employee compensation and to investing in our employees and trying to maintain the best labor force that we can maintain in a very difficult labor market. So we knew that those were costs that we were going to have to cover. We're fortunate to not have the kind of high debt or high pension obligations that many cities suffer from. We have pension obligations, but we're not in the range that many cities are, where they have to constantly put extra funds into those funds. Employee medical insurance, as you know, the governing body just approved the new plan that actually, thanks to the competitive process that we did and in good recent experience, has actually gone down about 3%. Some of which we were able to pass on to the benefit of the employees. So this has been a real positive. My next slide. Thank you. Whoops. Risks. I think it's important for setting the context to understand what those risks are. And the first one I don't need to spend more time on. You just saw the whole presentation. The economy and the effects on the GRT are obviously a significant risk. I think it's such a risk that it's likely that in a couple of months, 3 months, it's likely that the governing body is going to want to do another review of the budget circumstance. And I think it is very possible we'll be looking at making adjustments to this budget. And I just want to say that going into it. We don't know where that's going, but we think that that's possible. And in a tight budget, which we have, that may literally require the finance committee and the governing body to take another look in a fairly short period of time. Liability exposure is one that worries me. Not only has our self-insured retention number gone up substantially in the last few years, meaning that we pay a fairly large amount of our liability before our insurance kicks in. So the liability fund that we maintain has about, as I recall being told, about $2 million. And if we had an extra million, I would love to have had that in that fund at this point. We don't have big replacement reserves, equipment replacement, replacement or maintenance for facilities, those kinds of reserves. It's nice to be able to maintain reserves for that kind of spending. We're not blessed with that type of reserve. Staffing challenges, primarily, what I'm talking about here is it's very difficult in this labor market to hire talent. And that's why, among other things, it's so important that the governing body was willing to invest in the employee compensation, because this market is getting very, very difficult in many important ways. Exacerbating that a little bit, and we can talk about this if you want, but our city and most cities, I think virtually every city I've managed, budgets a vacancy credit. When you adopt a budget, we literally put in there a credit which assumes a certain level of vacancy during the course of the year. If you didn't do that, your budget would look like it's out of balance, and it puts elected officials into a position of doing furloughs and layoffs that they don't need to do, because you're not going to spend all the money in the first place. So you actually budget vacancy credits. And our budget this year has fairly significant vacancy credits assumed. And so when we talk about the staffing challenges, on the one hand, we want to get people hired because we need them. On the other hand, we have to have a certain amount of vacancy in order for our budget to work. Emergency management is always a risk for every community. And we are very aggressively hoping to move forward on programs this year in that regard because of those risks, especially in the fire, we call it fire hardening, that you can do to make your community safer. The housing and homelessness situation is obviously a challenge for this and every community. The grant environment, I think we all need to be concerned that we have always counted on a certain level of grants and entitlements that are not certain at this point. And in fact, we've gotten some feedback that that in the future, the state and I'm sure the feds are wanting to make sure that when they assign funding, that the funding is going to get spent. And so the focus now will always be on shovel-ready kinds of projects. So you'll see there's a lot of focus on getting design done so that we can put grant applications in for shovel-ready projects. And then capital project funding is always a challenge. And in a moment, I'll talk about a few of the projects that we have that don't have enough funding, and we need to be aware of that. Okay, the next slide. And I hope I don't scare people with this slide. What this very simple slide, and what this slide attempts to do is to show the status of what we call our general fund balance. And I'm spending a lot of time on general fund. We have other funds. We've got enterprise funds that are in good shape as long as we make the decisions that need to be made going forward. We're in a good position for that. But the general fund being the one discretionary fund that gives us the most opportunity to spend money wherever the governing body decides to spend it. That particular fund is relatively tight. But I don't want to scare you into thinking it's not in good shape, because it is in good shape. I mean, right now, as we start the new year, we're projecting about $32.6 million general fund balance, and that's an estimate. You can't know that until the year's over, but that's an estimate. And then when you look into the next year, we're projecting revenues of 146 million, expenditures of 141.5. And then we have this category that I'm not going to dwell on unless you need me to, transfers in and transfers out. And every city has funds that you transfer money into. Some of them you subsidize because they're not self-sustaining. So you move general fund money into subsidized. Sometimes you have you have transfers between funds. Sometimes you have overhead charges that need to be transferred. There's a number of reasons why you would have money that you transfer. Andy and Alexis can give you the whole laundry list. It's every budget in the world has that. We've done a little bit of an accounting change this year, which makes some of the year-over-year comparisons difficult, but it's a one-year thing. Next year we'll be on the same accounting method, and none of that'll matter. But those numbers are fairly big numbers that get transferred between funds. So the transfers in 13.9 million, the transfers out 19.1 million. And that leads you to a bottom line, which is not surprisingly the same balance as we start with, 32.6 million. And it's the same because we build to that. I mean, we're building to have a budget that meets the money that we've got available. In that number, though, is the emergency reserve. So essentially what we have is a $32.6 million emergency reserve. And that's the money we have available for spending on the various things that the city wants to spend. Now, that doesn't mean it's the only money the city has. There are other pots of money, some of which are available for use. There's a green bank fund of $500,000. There's the affordable housing fund that's got probably somewhere between $4.5 and $7.5 million at any given time that theoretically would be reachable. I'm not suggesting you use any of those funds. I'm just saying that there are other pots of money other than this, but this is ample for what we're trying to accomplish this year. So hopefully that didn't scare anybody. I do think it's important going into the budget review to understand where there's capital projects that don't have funding sources yet. Several of these, I think the funding sources are fairly obvious. In other places, they're not. We can, next slide, please. Midtown, you're all very much aware that ultimately we're going to need to finance the Midtown infrastructure. We'll hopefully get some of that from TIF, the tax increment financing potential of creating the redevelopment agency or redevelopment district. But Midtown is a big number, and we're going to be working on that very, very regularly here for a while. I don't know what La Familia roof is, but I was advised we, at this point, don't have the funding set aside for that. Same thing with the Shelby Street pedestrian bridge, which our friends at the state are very concerned that we finish, and we need to finish. And that's about $1 million project, I'm told, that in terms of what's not funded. The design is funded, the project itself is not. Warehouse 21, we hope that we'll have a good plan on that. That will require some funding. The Cerro Gordo Bridge, which is a new discovery, that the urgency on replacing that bridge, first repairing it and then replacing it. Street repaving. Street repaving is a good story in our budget picture because the city did the debt, we're about to do the debt issue. We got the approval to move forward $25 million of funding. On an annual basis, we still are going to need to supplement it with more than that. And so that will be in our future and something we have to stay aware of. IT projects, just the same thing. I can point to new IT projects that we should feel really good about that we're doing, and we will always have some more that we still need to do. Same thing with facilities. I'm missing a comma. Parks, recreation centers. There is deferred maintenance that we need to be very much on top of. WWTP is wastewater treatment plant. We do have a plan on that we'll be talking at great length with the governing body in the future, and we're very optimistic that we've got a strategy that will help us make that plant very solid and sustainable in the future. So that's something that we still need funding for, but we think we have a pathway to do that. Okay, the next slide. Okay. What I like to do is to say to the governing body, to the public, what the new budget buys you. And we feel very, very good about what this budget's providing our community. There are certain things that are in the budget on this left-hand column, some of which we wish we didn't have to fund, but the 5 police positions, these are not sworn. These are non-sworn positions that are involved in processing requirements from a recent New Mexico Supreme Court decision that requires expedited response on discovery, so that that puts at risk releasing criminals that shouldn't be released if we're not able to respond on the fast pace that is required now by the court. So we needed extra positions to do that. I would suggest that when we get to the police budget, that that's something that you'll be able to talk to the chief in much more detail. The second item there, 3 youth and family services program managers. One of them would be assigned to the housing program, one of them on the homeless services program, and the third one is grants, data, data management, being able to evaluate the performance of what we do. It's a very creative position that Henry will be able to provide you details on when he addresses you. We're very excited about the program opportunities that are being pursued in that arena. The third one, the paralegal position that's in the city clerk's budget. It's not for the city clerk, it's for the public defender, who has a tremendously high caseload and no staff at this point. So this is a minimal response to that very significant need. The next one's an administrative manager in arts and culture. And I put this down as if it was general fund, and that's my mistake because the art and culture budget is funded from lodger's tax, which I am now learning. 2 finance positions are in here. One is a senior budget analyst, and the other is an administrative manager, vendor management. And the finance, in the spirit of budgeting, the finance staff eliminated way more money than this amount out of their budget in order to justify the funds in order to do this. And they'll explain that in more detail. And then, of course, we have the extra cost, the class and comp program increases. We have some increases July 1. We have some others in January. And then that program will have been completed. And so that's been a very big positive for the organization. It is recommended that the city approve a 3% across the board raise, which would allow us to keep up better with the labor market, which is still taking employees from us. So it's important that we stay competitive. That raise costs $4.5 million across all funds and about $3.2 million in the general fund. We also have a $2 million increase in the pension fund this year that hits the budget. That's not all required. That isn't response to the class and comp as much as it is an adjustment that the retirement system is requiring, probably relating to their investment scenario. Excuse me. Okay. Speed cameras and noise cameras. We're excited about this program. The governing body's already approved that we move forward on that. That will be something that is included in this year's budget and will be implemented during this year. We are looking at civilian and/or contract administration of that program. And we have very high expectations that the program will be able to fund itself. And that's experience that people have had around the country and I've had in one of my own cities. We will go into that program trying to administer it judiciously so that we do it in such a way that people can understand that we're not looking to make money. We're looking to save lives. That's the purpose. The noise cameras, of course, living as I do down Cerrillos, I can tell you that I hear it all night long. And hopefully this is a quality of life improvement that will make a difference. The utility billing system that we have is in bad shape, and we have got a program that's moving forward this year and should be implemented, and we're really quite excited about that. The rest of this page, I'm talking about initiatives that will be pursued, not so much budget. Some of it is using the budget we've already got, but to use it in such a way that we get the results that you all are looking for. The Midtown program, of course, I don't need to explain that. We are looking at reviewing water and wastewater rates, and we're going to be bringing that in very, very soon for consideration. It's critically important that this be done. And I will tell you that it's the kinds of increases we're looking at are well within reasonable range. And especially given some of the cities that I've recently worked in that have had horrendously high increases that were a result of not taking action when they needed to take action. And so I'm proud to see that we're going to bring in something that is before those crisis years and should be sustainable. Airport projects, we're excited about the things going on at the airport, and every month now, new things are getting done and moving forward. We meet with them regularly, and we're excited about that. IT projects, on every page, I've got something that talks about IT projects because we just have a lot of work to do, and the staff is moving those along. The bond issue paving program, we'll be selling that debt probably late summer, early spring. And we'll be in a position to get the design work done and then start the paving. Meanwhile, the other paving projects will be going along full speed. So that's one of the good news items. Housing and homeless programs. Mr. Hammond Paul is very actively moving the agenda on this with his incredible team. And we're going to be bringing in a contract proposal that allows us to do more work on the street and to move that agenda to where we can start hopefully finding locations to build some housing, some transitional housing. We've been calling them pallet shelters. I'm trying to get rid of that term because I don't think it's the right term. Micro communities. We believe, people will say to me, "You're putting homeless in my community." No, we're putting housed people in communities. These are homes. These are residents. When we build these communities, we'll be serving residents at that point. Conservation and sustainability. The mayor's got some really great concepts about tying the programs from multi-departments into initiatives that are coordinated and really push out education into the community. So we're excited about a conservation and sustainability initiative that we're going to be getting off the ground this year. The DEI program, I want to make sure nobody thinks we aren't dealing with this. It's been a challenge to find the staff because the market it's higher than what we had budgeted at, but we're going to move that agenda, and we're going to get that program installed and started. Public safety nuisance. There's two parts of this. One is the part I already described about civilian management of these new safety programs, but we also want to push the envelope on nuisance abatement. And nuisance abatement costs money. I mean, it's legal costs and it's staff cost, and it's at times it's demolition or site clearance costs. But we need to have it be a frontline program that we pursue, not just case by case where something is so bad that finally we say, okay, and deal with it. We need it to be something that we are pursuing, that there's a point person and we can make it happen. That's on our agenda for this year. Emergency management, fire safety, I've talked about that. We owe it to this community to get out there and help people understand what they can do and what we can do in case of a major emergency. And then the youth and family services programs I've already talked about. The last thing that I cover when I do budget review is one more slide, is the things that aren't in the budget. And I'm not going to belabor this because that's what you're going to talk about when you're doing your reviews with each of the departments. But there's always something that isn't in the budget. And we should just be aware of that. I'm only going to cover a couple of these because I don't think it's necessary, but I do worry about our parks maintenance function. We get so many comments from people. And yet the people who are doing this work are almost working at heroic levels as far as I'm concerned. They're doing a phenomenal job. And it's painful when you hear people criticize the maintenance level because they're doing as well as they can do. The trouble is we really need to have an extra park crew. I mean, that's really what we need. It's expensive and we're going to have to talk about, to do that, we'd probably have to change funding on something else, but I think that's a high priority to talk about. The park staff would like to have a contract services administrator. That's their highest priority. And it's not in the budget, so I promised I would at least mention it. Park rangers, we've talked about. I think the park rangers we've got have done a great job. We have vacancies right now. There'll be more people coming on board. And then I think we can make an assessment of what else we need. But the park rangers are doing a great job cleaning up sites that where homeless encampments have moved in. And of course, they have other duties than that. But that's an important program. I don't think I need to go through the rest of these. You can see things that are not listed in the budget. All of them are important. There's always important things that don't get budgeted, and we'll do the best we can. I did promise the judge, our terrific municipal court judge, I did promise him that I would mention so that he didn't have to. I told you we scrubbed the budgets this year. We probably scrubbed his budget a bit too much. And we have a new judge, a different judge than we had a couple of years ago. And when we went back and evaluated spending in the court, it wasn't necessarily the spending from his court. And he needs to have some additional funds. And I've committed to him, we'll do what we can to find those funds. And he'll eventually be before you and you can talk about it. That's kind of the overview. Overall, good situation. It's tight. We don't have a lot of money to play with. I think we'll be back in a few months to take yet another look at it, given the economy. I'm proud to be here. I'm proud to work with this mayor, I will tell you. He's inspired me, and I think he does a great job putting forward creative ideas that we have a chance to pursue this year. And I'm happy to be here and having a chance to do that. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scott, and thank you for that big picture overview. I think that's very helpful for all of us. Questions from the committee? Councilor Cassett.
I'm curious for some of these questions, should we wait for the departments to get in? Would that be?
I think so. I don't want to be the spokesperson for all the department heads, so.
Okay, great. I'll make note and talk to them when they get here. Thank you.
I do, let's see, do we have other questions? I have two. So in terms of the, we're doing class and comp, another tranche, I think is the way the mayor's letter might have characterized it, in our commitment to bringing salaries up to be market competitive. So there's a raise involved in that. Am I correct in that? And what is the percentage? What is it? Or do you not call it a raise?
I think the class and comp, for the most part, the salary adjustments based on surveys, I think got done last year, for the most part. And then there are what they referred to as parity increases that were being implemented over time.
Okay, so we have, I see the 3% raise for city employees, but then I'm curious, there's not a percentage increase based on what we're doing with class and comp, because what we're doing is a different kind of thing.
Yeah, the 3% is standalone.
Okay.
The class and comp, those additional tranches, one in July, one in January. As I understand it, for the most part, that's related to what they called parity increases. There was this formula that was used, very creative formula. And that got implemented over time. It wasn't done all at one time. So as I recall, that's what the bulk of that is.
And I guess, so those parity increases, though, they result in more money going to city employees though, right? Even though it's, but we don't call it a raise, we call it an adjustment.
I think you can call it what you want, but it would confuse it if we called it, it's not the across the board raise. That's a different,
Okay, because not everybody's getting it. Is that, it's based on the study and the market and who needs parity and who doesn't,
and it would have been too expensive to implement it all at one time. So it
right?
spread over time.
Right, okay, so, all right, I think that's helpful. Director Oster, did you want to?
Madam Chair, just a little bit of historical refresh on that. So we did, when the new pay plan was approved by the governing body about a year ago, we did implement part of the recommendations of the comp and class study, including the first 25% of that hybrid parity. And then we implemented an additional 25% of hybrid parity in December. And this budget that we're proposing to you would implement the two remaining 25% tranches, one in July and one in January, to finish implementing the full implementation of the recommendations from comp and class during the FY26 year.
Okay, to get to 100% of the parity needs.
Correct, Madam.
Okay, that's helpful. Just one other question, Mr. Scott. You, in one of your things in your general fund calculation that you thought would scare us, excess general fund balance 2.6 million. That 2.6 million is spent in this budget. You have,
It's that's money that projected right now
could be there.
could be available at the end of the fiscal year, but not necessarily will be available. It's just an estimate.
Okay, and which fiscal year? The 25 or
At
26?
the end of 26.
Okay,
If you look at that chart, it starts with the same number as it ends with.
okay,
But that's today, as of today, they're estimating that by June 30th, that we'll have $32.6 million in the general fund balance. And then if we're able to maintain where spending revenues and expenditures stay in balance, we would end the next fiscal year with the same 32.6. That's really questionable right now
Mhm.
because of the economy. And so, and some of the projects that we may need money along the way. So I would not want anybody to think that that 2.6 is play money.
available, right?
You know,
Right.
we don't have it yet.
Okay, and so if it did come to be real for us, that's the kind of thing that we do sort of beginning of FY26. I'm sorry, the beginning of calendar year 26, say in January. That sometimes we have had excess GRT revenue that we've been able to allocate. That's what it's looking like, maybe.
We're trying to say that right now wouldn't count on that being a big pot of money that. you
Right.
want to do that.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you. Counselor Cassett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One more question, just, as we think about this as the budget as a whole, as you mentioned, I agree with you that Parks is high on the priority list that I hear from my constituency. You mentioned a new park crew would be very expensive. What does that mean?
Well, we'll let
Melissa, tell us.
McDonald address that more directly, but we're talking about a number of people. I mean, a whole crew would be, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 people,
Mhm.
supervisor. But that's what if I'll use her example, and I should let her speak for herself, but we operate with a budget that allows us to maintain an average service standard level. We want to do more. We would like to do more. We would like to meet people's expectations better. But in order to raise it from that mediocre level to a higher level, it would take an extra crew. And I think that's a good way to budget, is to say, okay, what level of service do we think we can afford? And then we'll provide that level of service. And then we need to tell the public, this is what we're able to provide you. And you know, I feel bad when people call and say, why are you not maintaining such and such a trail? And we don't have a budget that allows us to maintain that level. We're a city with lots of parks and lots of trails, and we just don't have a budget that matches that if we're going to try to maintain a higher level. So that's a discussion that I think is an appropriate discussion, and then the decision has to be made. What can we afford? And then we should explain to our public what that is.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And then, of course, we'll talk to Melissa. And this may also be a Director McDonald question, but I'm curious about, you know, with that analysis, the intersection between the impact of homelessness on the parks and the extra, is that when we're talking about that average level of service, is part of it because of the impact and the extra maintenance and repairs that are required because of the impact on, I know some of my flagship parks in District 4 are absolutely impacted by that.
There's no question. And I mean, it also has an impact on the ranger program. I mean, it's all of the above.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Other questions? Mayor, did you have anything you wanted to add at this point?
You know, I think with the people who've been waiting to speak to the committee, I think I'll reserve my comments. I hope folks found the letter at the beginning of the budget book helpful.
Okay.
And obviously in the course of hearings, I'll be able to weigh in when I have a contribution to make, but I know we've got people waiting to talk.
Okay, so flag me when you want to. And with that in mind, I would like to move the union, with the committee's permission, the union presentations in front of the finance department, which is next, if that would be okay. And can I get a motion to move the union presentations to the next order of business?
So moved.
So we have a motion and a second to move the union presentations as our next order of business, then we'll go back. And I'm hoping we can get you all in before lunch so you don't have to hang around. We're going to need a roll call. I think is Councilor Lindell on or not on?
Madam Chair, I am not sure.
Okay,
Do we
if
have
she's
anyone on by Zoom?
okay, I'm hearing she's not on, so I'm just going to do this by voice vote. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes, and we will go on now to the union presentations. And let me just click my, I don't know if I don't see an order that was defined here. So I'm happy to have you all come as and if you don't mind, as you come up, we all know who you are here in the chamber, but for anybody who may be watching on Zoom, if you could just introduce yourselves and the union that you represent, that would be very helpful. Welcome and thank you for waiting. I appreciate it and happy to hear from you.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is Louis DeMello speaking with AFSCME Local 3999. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Finance Committee members, council members, Mayor stepped out, city manager, everyone else in attendance, and fellow employees. I'm here again on behalf of AFSCME Local 3999. We're proud, and I'm also here with several of my team. I have Clinton Peterson and Therese Martinez with me. We're proud to represent the AFSCME Local 3999 bargaining unit today, our brothers and sisters, members that represent over 50% of the city of Santa Fe's workforce. Today, we are addressing your invitation to set before you the budgetary and financial needs of our membership. As you're aware, the current union contract is in arbitration, so our first ask is funding AFSCME's new collective bargaining agreement with the city of Santa Fe. That is the utmost importance to us for this coming fiscal year. Regardless of which side the arbitrator selects, that is a bridge the city will finally be crossing, and it will be during this coming fiscal year. Our other financial ask is funding for supplementary air conditioning units in our environmental services trucks. We have multiple city units in our environmental services division where the built-in AC unit does not actually cool down the interior of the truck. The way the units are built, the AC is directly above the engine block. This causes the unit to have functionally useless air conditioning for the cab. During last year's summer of 2024, in 80-degree weather. This was at about 10 a.m. We had AC running full blast and the interior of the cabin got to 78 degrees. A secondary supplemental AC unit would solve this problem and make some of the largest vehicles we put on the city streets much safer. These two items are direct, tangible benefits that our membership would see with your support and funding allocation. These will make direct improvements for our city workers, which also benefit the public.
Vacancies in job positions across the city are squeezing our bargaining unit out of every ounce of productivity we can muster. In addition, we understand that departments are using the monetary value of their workforce vacancies to supplement their flatline budgets. And even the flatline budgets are getting deeper cuts to supplement the administration's monetary interests. This is the 5th year of flatline budgets. AFSCME proposes and again requests that a line item be added to the future budget in perpetuity for contract negotiations that will reflect fair and equitable cost of living increases with inflation rates factored in that can be distributed to the financially affected articles in the AFSCME union contract. We feel this is a particularly important and necessary addition to the recommended budget.
Well, I'm Glenn Peterson, Secretary Treasurer of Local 3999 and member of the negotiation committee. Every day as you go about your normal routine, keep in mind that a maintenance worker is making sure the city building you walk into has working AC and heating. When you drive your car, a public works or streets worker is making sure that you still have a functional road to drive on. When you take a drink from the water fountain, just keep in mind that a water division worker is making sure that you have quality water. When you visit a city park, a parks worker is making sure that the park is clean and inviting. Even now, we are able to watch and stream this meeting thanks to the work of our IT department. These past few years have been challenging for all of us and will be even more challenging in the years to come. We've lived through a pandemic, rising costs of living, and inflation. Climate change is making our summers hotter and our winters drier. Cost of housing is showing no signs of decreasing anytime soon in a city where income and wealth inequality is very apparent. We just watched 2 really good presentations about how this is directly impacting our negotiating committee and our workforce. Our workers are simply being priced out of the housing market. A lot of our income is just going towards rent now. And vacancies are also hurting us as well. We're being asked to do a lot with very little, and vacancies and job positions across the city are squeezing our bargaining unit out of every ounce of productivity we can muster. Another thing that I want to clarify is that the 25% class and comp was only given to non-union in January. Union workers have yet to see that and asked me Local 3999. So that's another thing to keep in mind. So as the committee is preparing for the next fiscal year, I'd like to petition on behalf of AFSCME workers for the city of Santa Fe to keep us and our contract in mind as we go into FY26. We're AFSCME Local 3999 and we make Santa Fe happen. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think we have representatives from fire and police. You guys want to rock, paper, scissors or what? All right, police 1. Welcome. Fire, sorry.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Charles Gonzalez.
Is that mic on? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Or just lift it up a bit.
I represent the City of Santa Fe Firefighters, Local 2059. I'm the president. Here with me today is my secretary, Derek Cowell. In speaking with police, unfortunately, they weren't able to show up today. President Plummer is out of town, but we'll go ahead and go straight into ours. First, I want to start by thanking everyone here for hearing us out today. I've been a part of negotiations and a union leader for the past 5 years. We worked with Mayor Weber and the city councilors we've been able to accomplish a lot. I have to show a lot of gratitude to the chief in working with us and making sure we can get things done within our own budget. A lot of that we've focused on is growth, recruitment, retention. We've been able to do that with class and compensation and receiving those funds up front. That was a big thing for us. In terms of recruiting, it helped us out a lot. As you can see, this past year, we had the most applicants we've ever received in probably 5 to 6 years. And we have a legit pool of people that are wanting to come be City of Santa Fe firefighters. So it's our hope that we can continue to increase those numbers and up our numbers in these next few years and bring in more firefighters to accommodate the citizens of Santa Fe and the growth that we're anticipating. That's a huge thing for us. And, you know, it takes a lot to develop these firefighters and bring them through to bring a great service to the citizens of Santa Fe. So that was a big thing for us. Another thing that helped us out, specifically class and compensations, is retention. We have been able to retain people and be competitive with departments around us. That has been a huge thing for morale in our department. It's been a huge thing for the citizens of Santa Fe because we've been able to keep people here, the people we've invested in. And I think it speaks to our services that we provide. We've also been able to retain people and grow in the position, bring out more promoted positions. I know the airport was a big deal. We were able to add some promoted positions to the airport to staff those trucks, to provide more resource out there and be able to accommodate the changes we're making and staff the apparatus we have out there. Also, retention is a big thing that's come with it too, is keeping people safe. We have stayed up to date on some of the greatest technology in the fire service, upgrading our packs, upgrading our life safety systems, providing annual physicals and to our members to ensure that we're staying ahead of the cancer that comes for firefighters all around the country, all around the world that are doing the job. And we're going to continue to do that and try to hit all aspects of safety when it comes to our people, because that's, in our opinion, that's very important for keeping people here and retaining them, knowing that they're safe on the job. And lastly, growth. Growth has been something that we've been keeping up with Chief Moya. He's been a big on that. You know, growing this department, letting everybody know what we need to be able to keep the city safe, keep his people safe, and from new trucks to new SCBA equipment, sitting down with us and figuring out problem solving within our own budget to free up money to help with this or help with that. And I think we're just hoping to be able to get more from the city when it comes to that. Having a more open negotiation process specifically for financials and hearing what we need as a membership and as a department. There's several of our support services that haven't seen growth in years, and we would love to be able to fix that and grow just like the city's growing. So coming to you today and seeing the budget and everything like that those are our main asks. That's what we're hoping for. It's always been a belief of mine that great firefighters, they're not born, they're developed and they're created within their departments. And I feel like we put out a great product and great fire personnel. So it's our hope that we can continue to speak and hear us out to keep getting these great employees and providing a great service. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I guess we don't have the police department here. And I think that is it in terms of union presentations. I guess we have only one more thing on our agenda today, which is the finance department budget. And I would recommend that we just do that and then we'll just break for the day. I don't know that we need a lunch break today, if that's okay, Director Oster.
Certainly, Madam Chair, I'm ready to go.
Okay. let's, and if that's okay with the committee, are you all okay with that? Let's then move ahead.
Wonderful. Let's test out this mic. It sounds like it's working. Great. Um, well, my name is Emily Oster, and I am your finance director for the city of Santa Fe. I am very pleased to be here this afternoon to present the finance department's FY26 budget request to you. I would like to start by introducing the finance team members that are here in the room. Let me make sure I've got everyone here. We have Alexis Lotero, and if folks could wait as I introduce you, or stand up, that's perfect. Alexis is our Assistant Finance Director, truly the right hand to the director in this department, and really couldn't get through a day without Alexis. So I want to really share my gratitude. Next up, we have Andy Hopkins. Andy is our Budget Officer. Wonderful. Thanks, Andy. So Andy is our vault of knowledge, I'll say. And Andy is one of our go-to people who knows the answer to every question. Also an invaluable resource. And I know Andy has been part of the city of Santa Fe for a number of years, so probably really needs no introduction at this point. Okay, continuing through the team. We have Anita Medina. Anita is our principal budget analyst, and Anita coordinates a lot of our budgeting actions related to personnel, which is a really big job. And she brings a wealth of experience and knowledge to that process and is an incredibly good resource, and also ensures that personnel actions are moving seamlessly through our process. So very grateful to have Anita on board. Next, we have Christina Martinez. Christina is one of the newer additions to our budget office, but has been with the budget team for over a year, which we're delighted to have. And Christina works on all things budget, from the building of the department budgets to reviewing travel to working with Anita on position actions and just, basically handling all of the day-to-day work that goes along with our budgeting processes. So very lucky to have Christina on board as part of the budget team. Next in the room, I saw Chris Parker. Chris is also a senior budget analyst. I think I forgot to say Christina's title. Chris and Christina are our senior budget analysts. And as I mentioned when I was talking about Christina's role, Chris and Christina really do a lot of the day-to-day work involved with the budgeting processes in our office, and they work closely with Alexis, Andy, and Anita as we both implement our new budget and also manage it throughout the year. Let me just do a quick look and see if there's anyone else here from the finance department right now. Okay, I don't see anyone else in the room. So if there is anyone else in the room, please raise your hand if you'd like to be introduced. All right, great. So the introductions that I just did were primarily our budget team, who will be with you throughout the budget hearing process. And I would like to mention that our budget team is currently fully staffed, which is a big change from prior years. And we're very excited about the opportunities that will bring, having a full staff in the budget office. So I'd like to start with an overview. Next slide, please. Great, thank you. An overview of the finance department. So I've included our mission statement here just to give kind of a little bit of context about what we do in the finance department. Some of the key points here for me are building public trust through sound financial management and helping the city make innovative and effective business decisions. Of course, ensuring that the city is adequately protecting its assets by having appropriate internal controls in place and complying with federal, state, and local laws and regulations is a key part of our mission. We strive to earn the confidence of our internal and external customers, including city staff and constituents. And I really want to emphasize that, in talking about what the finance department does, that we are a customer service organization. We serve other city departments primarily so that they can deliver direct service to the department. And I consider our department to be a key part of the city's operational infrastructure to keep things running smoothly, even though in most cases our team members are not providing direct service to the public, although we do have some folks that are doing that type of work. The role that we play is less public facing perhaps than some other departments, but it's also very important to ensuring that other departments can deliver direct service to the public. In terms of the organizational structure of our department, our budget is structured into 6 divisions: administration, accounting, budget, fleet, purchasing, and treasury. We currently have 57 FTE, which is full-time equivalent positions across those 6 divisions. That is for the current year for FY25. At this point, we have 10 of those positions that are vacant, which is a 17.5% vacancy rate. I'm happy to share with you that we have a number of positions that are post-interview where we're working with the HR team to submit offers. And I'm hoping that in the month of May, we will be able to have 2 of those positions filled, which will take us down to our historic low vacancy rate of 8 positions. One of the goals that I've set for our department is to get to 0% vacancy. As the city manager mentioned, we do have a vacancy credit built into our budget. So at a point, that will come into play, but we aren't at that point yet. And we are recruiting and hiring for all vacant positions and hoping to fill them as soon as we can. Next slide, please. Okay, with that, I'd like to talk a little more specifically about highlights of our FY26 budget request. And as the city manager introduced for you, I will be talking about opportunities and risks that exist for our finance department within our FY26 budget request. So the first thing that I've highlighted on the slide is we did build in a $2 million decrease in general fund recurring dollars for accounting professional contracts. And we think that our need for contract support for accounting processes is decreasing, both because we're filling positions and because we've gotten caught up on audits, so we're no longer facing a backlog of work. I do want to highlight that this decrease doesn't mean that we will completely end our relationship with Clifton Larson Allen. They have been a great partner, and it is really a key part of our, I'll call it our safety net. If we have vacancies in positions, if we have special projects that we need help with, and areas where we're continuing to improve and enhance business processes, primarily through the introduction of new technology, which I'll talk about in a little while. But I don't want to suggest that we don't need CLA anymore, because we do. We need consulting support. Another thing that has made this possible to decrease the general fund for accounting professional contracts in the FY26 budget request is a commitment from the utilities department to start covering some of the cost of services that CLA has been providing to them in terms of helping with accounting processes related to utility billing and collections, and ensuring that we're accounting for cash receipts in particular, but also billing for utilities timely in the Munis system, as well as in the UCIS system, which will be replaced hopefully in the near future with the advanced utility billing system. It's important to note that while we are proposing a significant decrease in general fund recurring dollars for accounting professional contracts, we are not proposing to end the need for consulting services in that area. But we are looking at the costs being allocated out more directly to the areas that are receiving the benefit. And also, you know, just recognizing what our current needs are in light of our workload today. One of the opportunities that decrease in general fund dollars for accounting professional contracts allows us to do is propose the creation of 2 new positions within the finance department. So those are our opportunities within this budget. One of those positions would be focused on capital budgeting, which is something that we've talked about quite a bit and something that we would like to improve and expand as we implement the new Questica budget software, which we've talked quite a bit about in Finance Committee. So we're proposing the creation of a new capital budgeting position in the budget division. And we're also proposing the creation of a new position for vendor management. Vendor management is, it's somewhat unusual currently in the city of Santa Fe in that it's being managed by the Information Technology Department, the ITT department. And we have agreed that we think it's a better fit within the finance department. And we need staff to be able to provide robust vendor management services to ensure that our vendor partners are able to do business with the city in an effective and efficient way, and that we're providing them with appropriate support and ensuring that we're getting the information we need from them to do federal reporting for things like 1099s and meet federal requirements related to reporting and payments that are made to vendors. So the last thing that I want to say on this slide is that our opportunities within this budget are funded by the risk. The risk is that we decrease the accounting professional services dollars too much, and we don't have the support we need from Clifton Larson Allen or another vendor that provides accounting support in the future. The opportunity that we're getting from that is the creation of these 2 new positions, which we absolutely need. So I will say that, you know, while there is a trade-off there, I am comfortable with this, and I believe that the level that we are funding accounting professional contracts at, or proposing to fund accounting professional contracts at in the FY26 budget, is appropriate, in my opinion. Next slide, please. The next 3 slides that I have talk about our major goals for FY26. And these are things that I, as the director of our department, plan to work with our division directors and our officers and our leadership within the finance department, and really every member, all 57 FTE within our department, to move forward these initiatives in FY26. The first goal aligns well with the overall vision for the city of investing in people. So I want to give credit here to our accounting officer, Matt Bonifer, who's not in the room with us, but this language about fostering a human-centered environment where the staff within the finance department feel valued, heard, and empowered to challenge current practices and leverage their expertise to implement positive changes. That's a direct quote from Matt Bonifer. And that tells you really what kind of, that's a good example of the leadership that we've brought in and that we have built and developed and retained within the finance department. We are a service organization, like I said, and we provide service by people doing the work to ensure that other departments can provide service directly to the public. So I can't really emphasize enough how important people are to the successful operation of a finance department. We have to have the right people, and those people have to have the right resources. It's very important that those folks feel valued, heard, and empowered, and also have the support to pursue positive changes and help the city move forward with modernization and implementing new technologies that we need to improve our business processes. So in terms of a metric, you know, what does this mean? How will we measure success here? It'll be measured by retention of staff in FY26 in relation to our current FY25 levels, and progress on priority projects and initiatives. And one of the things that I've been hearing discussion about lately within leadership within the city is that second part, progress on priority projects and initiatives. So as we continue to invest in our staff, we will also be working with the team to ensure that we're delivering on key initiatives. For example, the implementation of the Questica software is the one that we've talked a lot about. That's a very, very important project that we want to see through, and we need to ensure that we have the right people to implement that software in the best way that we can for the city of Santa Fe, and position ourselves to be leaders in municipal budgeting as we move forward. Next slide, please. Okay, this one is kind of like our bread and butter, I'll say. Deliver timely and accurate financial information. So these are, some of the core responsibilities of the finance department. Complete the budget in a timely fashion. This current budget for FY26 that we're working on right now, delivering that to the state by the statutory deadline of June 1st, and then also preparing an FY27 budget and getting that turned in by June 1st of 2026. That's the forward-looking piece of what we do in finance. Budgeting is about looking at the future. The part that looks at the past, which a lot of you know is really my wheelhouse, is financial reporting, and that's where the audits come into play. So our primary goal on that side is completing the FY25 financial statement and compliance audit in a timely fashion by December 15th of 2025. We're caught up now, and we're committed to staying caught up. I'm pleased to report that we are currently wrapping up an RFP for accounting services, for auditing services for the FY25 audit. So we will be coming forward in the next couple of months with a new contract to perform our audit for the FY25 fiscal year. We are on track to submit that to the state auditor's office in May in accordance with the deadline. So what I like to say to the accounting folks is that everything is where it should be. We're doing things at the right time. After, for me, most of the last 2.5 years have been doing things in a way that I would describe as off cycle, at a time that, is a little outside of the normal cadence and certainly at a very different pace. We were moving at warp speed for most of the last 2 years to get through 4 audits in about 18 months. Getting 4 audits released by the state auditor's office in 18 months is a very accelerated schedule and not the normal pace that we do this work at. But now, with regard to the audits, we're pretty much on cycle. We're doing things at the time that you would normally expect. We're working right now on our RFP, preparing a contract, getting ready, looking ahead to the FY25 audit. So if I had to sum up this slide in one sentence, I would say that our goal here is to do what we do best, which is deliver timely and accurate financial information, both to the governing body, to city team members, and to the public. And that is fundamental to every organization. Every municipality has that obligation, and the finance department needs to deliver on it. So we're committed to doing that. Next slide, please. Okay, this next slide is the flashy stuff. This is the exciting things, the bells and whistles. So our third major goal for FY26 is to modernize technology and business processes. And I know we've talked a lot in Finance Committee and in governing body about how successful implementation of new technology requires changes in business processes. We can't take the way we always did things in E1 and expect that to work in Munis. That just, we've got to adapt what we do as humans to use the technology tools in the way that they were designed to be used and the way that they can be leveraged to maximum effect. So that's why I put, not only is this implementing new technology, this is also modernizing and updating business processes so we can get the full benefit of that technology. So on this slide, I've talked about a couple of key technology projects that we're working on, of course, in partnership with the ITT department, and many of these touch all city departments. A lot of these solutions are things that are going to be used citywide, they're going to be, kind of housed within the finance department, but they will affect other city departments. So the first one is Questica. I've already mentioned that one a couple of times today. The implementation of this new budget software is critical to enable greater capabilities within the budget department, the budget office. And I've listed out some detail there, but we are looking for a more efficient and effective means of creating and working with budget scenarios. We would like to be able to come to you throughout the year and present you with budget to actual information, which is something that I know many of you have asked for. And also we would like to have ourselves, that's key to effectively managing the budget. So, Questica is a top priority. I think we've talked about it a lot, so I'll just leave it at that. But implementing Questica in FY26 is really critical to the future of the finance department. The next item that I've listed here has to do with purchasing. And this is an area where I know, the city manager and, other folks have elevated to us the need to implement improvements to our purchasing process to make it easier for all city departments to get what we need, whether it's contractual services, supplies, whatever it is that we need to make the process to purchase those items faster and easier. So implementation of a new purchasing software through the OpenGov system is key to updating and improving our purchasing process. I also want to preview for you that we expect to be coming forward with proposed updates to the city's purchasing ordinances and the purchasing manual that will help us modernize and streamline and improve the city's purchasing processes. So we will be likely coming forward with proposed amendments to the ordinances, mainly designed to address technical issues, roadblocks that we've seen in the current process, and introduce new tools into our purchasing toolbox that will make the process faster and easier. The next item that I've mentioned here has to do with implementation of new technology to oversee construction and process and capital improvement projects. We use CIP to mean both of those things, construction and process and capital improvement, and they are two different things. But in both cases, we need to improve our monitoring and management of those ongoing ongoing projects. And we actually have an audit finding in our FY24 audit that relates to this. We had a new finding that came up this year that talked about how we were not timely moving completed projects out of the construction and process category into the appropriate asset category. So I'm going to use the construction of the teen center as an example. That's an asset that the city constructed. During the construction period, we tracked the costs of building that building in construction and process. When the building was completed and placed in service, we needed to move that into the buildings asset category so that we could begin depreciating that. Because even though it's a brand new building, it doesn't have an infinite useful life. And in accounting, we recognize the use of an asset like a building over what we call the useful life through an expense called depreciation. So that might be a little bit more wonky accounting knowledge than you might want to talk about today. But this third bullet here on this slide talks about ensuring that we have the technology that we need to track expenses by project as construction is happening and as implementation is occurring. And then the tools to recognize when something is completed and we need to move it into the correct asset category so we can begin that depreciation process. That's the next step in the accounting cycle for those assets. The next bullet that I have here, it's pretty high level. It says implement additional functionality in the Munis ERP system. I mean, there is so much that Munis can do for us. And there are some things that Munis doesn't do well that we need outside systems, for example, Questica. But there is still so much potential in the Munis system. There's so much capability there to modernize and improve the way that we do business, particularly in the finance department. So we're looking at ways that we can leverage the existing Munis ERP system that the city already owns to support our efforts to implement process improvements for capital assets, grant management, procurement, treasury, cash reconciliation. It's kind of broad. It's across the board. There's a lot of capabilities still there in Munis. And so we want to continue to implement that and transition from, manual business processes or reliance on outside help like Clifton Larson Allen to using technology to accomplish those tasks. The last item that I have here listed is the implementation of the RTA fleet management software, which will help us streamline fleet management citywide. And this is another example of a partnership that we have with ITT and with multiple city departments to implement a technology tool that will be housed in the finance department in our fleet division, but will be used and will benefit all city departments that have vehicular assets, and not just, passenger vehicles. We're talking about dump trucks and buses and all of our fleet. So with that, we have an ambitious agenda when it comes to modernizing technology and business processes in FY26. And I really see this as one of the great opportunities that exists within our budget, is the ability to pursue all of these important projects. Next slide, please. Okay, well, this is my last one, and I just want to say on behalf of the finance team, thank you very much to the Finance Committee for your support. We have been on quite a journey, and we're in a good place right now. So I just wanted to thank the Finance Committee for sticking with us as we worked through some challenges, and tell you that from my perspective as a director, our situation is night and day from where it was 2.5 years ago. When I arrived at the city in September of 2022, we had some major challenges. And the way I see things today, we've addressed a lot of those. We still have some great opportunities, and we're going to continue to work to make things better in the finance department and do that in a way that has positive impacts on city staff and on our residents here in the city. But we're in a very different place than we were 2.5 years ago, and I am really proud of that. And I want to thank every member of our team within the finance department for the work that has gone into changing that trajectory. And also the mayor, the city manager, the finance committee, the governing body as a whole, for setting the tone that change was important and needed to be prioritized, because that is really what has made it possible for us to get to where we are today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we shouldn't miss an opportunity to thank you for your leadership in addressing these challenges. And, again, 4 audits in 18 months, extraordinary. And I think we should say it over and over again, what you accomplished in the period of time that you did. And it was significant work, important work. And I don't think we could have done it without the experience that you have brought. So really appreciate, as I've said before, you running into a building on fire, being willing to run into buildings on fire. So, okay. Thank you for that. Questions from the committee? Okay, Councilor Cassett.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to the finance team. I'll try to be as speedy as I can. First, you mentioned changes to procurement and purchasing, which we hear a lot about from various departments and the challenges there. One thing that I've been trying to better understand myself is how I know a lot of procurement is controlled by the state. We don't have as much. I don't think we have as much flexibility in our processes. And we adopted the procurement manual that essentially reflects the state. I'm curious where we do have flexibility because I hear a lot about, you know, we're going to work on our procurement processes, but if so much is dictated by the state, where do we actually have leverage points that we can utilize to improve this process?
Thank you for that question, Councillor Cassett. I think we do have opportunities within our purchasing process to make improvements. You're absolutely right. Some of what we do in purchasing is governed by state law, the state procurement code. And so we have to work within that structure and that framework, but we do have opportunities. Now, a couple of examples that come to mind, our purchasing team this fiscal year worked with the city attorney's office and other key stakeholders with people that work on procurement throughout city government to implement some key changes in how we process procurements. One example is that in the past, we had required vendors to provide a copy of their current city business license as a part of the contract packet. And we wouldn't complete a contract unless we had that in hand. So we were able to determine that that wasn't a requirement of the purchasing process. So we were able to move away from that and essentially remove a barrier to the purchasing process by no longer requiring that. Another positive change that was implemented that's already in place is that we combined 3 documents, the summary of contracts, the purchasing memo, and the purchasing checklist into one. And I know you all are familiar with this in your role of reviewing contracts. We now have one memo that incorporates all of the things that used to be in those 3 different documents. And there were a number of people like me that signed 3 documents and now we're signing one. You know, so that's an example of a process improvement that's already been implemented in the purchasing process that has really streamlined things. Now, looking ahead, in regards to technology that we're using in the purchasing process, the purchasing team has really been a leader in willingness, I would say, and the courage that it takes to try new things. So they were out in front with implementation of new functionality in Munis. We implemented functionality called the bid module in Munis in December of 2023. So we've been working with it for a little over a year, not quite a year and a half yet. And there have been some pretty difficult challenges that we faced in using that functionality in Munis in the bid module. And we've worked extensively with Tyler Munis to try to address it. And our purchasing officer, Travis Dutton-Leda, is actually part of a national group with Tyler Munis to try to improve that functionality in Munis. But we've come to a place where we've determined that what Munis is able to offer to us for that part of the procurement process, which is the part where vendors are submitting their bid or their information to us, their proposals to us, it's not meeting our needs. So as we move forward, we're going to be implementing that OpenGov solution that I mentioned. Not without, you know, I mean, that's a serious decision to move away from Munis, and we would prefer to do it in Munis, and we've really given that a good try. But where things are at with Munis right now, it's just not meeting our needs. So we're planning to implement the OpenGov procurement functionality to address some of those issues that we've seen in using the bid module within Munis. I'm trying to think, in the high level is that it's not easy for vendors to respond to our procurements in the bid module. There's some setup that has to be done. There are confusing things about the process, and we've tried to work with Munis to address that within the Munis technology, but you know, there were some things that we weren't able to overcome that we think will be resolved through the implementation of OpenGov. So that's an opportunity that we have going forward, specifically in regard to the city's procurement ordinance and the purchasing manual. The purchasing team, and specifically Travis, has worked with several of our department directors that are involved in projects that use construction and engineering resources. And they've identified a purchasing tool that's not currently permitted under the state procurement code, but it is an acceptable method of procuring, for example, engineering and construction services. There was a bill that was before the legislature during this session that would have added that procurement methodology to the state procurement code. It didn't go through in this session, but we have the ability by amending our ordinance to add that tool to our procurement toolbox at the city level.
Wait, so it's not allowed by the state procurement code, but we can do it here?
And Madam Chair, and Councillor Cassidy, yes. So this is one of the interesting things about the way municipalities are described in the state procurement code. So it's kind of a circular logic, and this is something we've been through with the city attorney's office, but under the state procurement code, municipalities are home rule, which means we make our own rules. But by adopting the state procurement code, we've also adopted the language that says we're home rule. So there are some current exceptions to, or I would say differences. There are some current differences between our procurement ordinance and our procurement manual and the state procurement code. One example that definitely stood out to me when I came to the city is relating to legal services. Under the city's procurement ordinance and the purchasing manual, we have an exemption for legal services. That exemption doesn't exist in the state procurement code. So we do have the flexibility under the state procurement code to adopt different parameters through city ordinance and through our purchasing manual, but we are still following the state procurement code. That makes sense?
Kind of. Sounds like we'll learn more, but thank you. I do appreciate that and jumping into the weeds with procurement. So the other, I have a couple of questions, but I'll just ask a couple more and then pass it on so we can be fair. I do want to go back to the conversations around CLA and the contracts there. So you mentioned that there's less budgeted in finance. However, there's still some budgeted in other departments. You mentioned public utilities. Are there other departments that there is BDD as well?
Madam Chair, yes, Councillor Cassett, that's correct. BDD has received quite a bit of support from CLA, and we want that to continue. BDD is a great example of how we can leverage a resource like CLA when we have turnover in staff to help stabilize the administrative functions during the period where we're recruiting and training and filling those key positions in the financial operations of an organization. Like in the case of BDD, we had a couple of people cycle through a key position, and so CLA has helped us keep stability there. So as far as the proposed structure for funding Clifton Larson Allen, so for the current year FY25 budget, we had budgeted $2.5 million in the finance department in recurring general fund dollars for accounting consulting support, which is for the Clifton Larson Allen contract. So the proposed budget for FY26 reflects a different structure. Some of those costs are proposed to be budgeted in public utilities. Some of them are proposed to be budgeted in BDD. And some of, there's $500,000 in recurring general fund that we've proposed to continue to be budgeted within the finance department. And then also, when we presented the one-time funding requests, there was an allocation of an additional $500,000 of one-time funding to continue services with CLA in FY26. Now, the city will have a decision to make in FY26 about accounting professional services because we will need to do an RFP. The current agreement, the current contract with Clifton Larson Allen is set to end on June 30th of 2026. And because it's professional services, we will need to go out to RFP. So it'll have been 4 years essentially of support with CLA. So we'll need to do a RFP if the city decides to continue if the city decides there's continued need for accounting consulting services, then we'll need to do a procurement. No.
Okay, so we have 1 million in finance, half reoccurring. It's interesting, and half one time. From general fund dollars for public utilities and BDD, is this from the enterprise funds?
Yes, Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett, yes.
Do you happen to know how much off your head for those? I know that we'll see
Madam
them.
Chair and councilors, I don't. Maybe the budget team can help me with that.
Which is not. Apparently BDD is the BDD fund. Thank you, Chair Romero Worth, who is very, very educated. In
Well,
BDD
if I
structure.
can, Counselor, the BDD is a unique, as you know, a city-county Los Campanas partnership, and it's the partners who fund that budget, and that budget will be, I think, presented at, I haven't looked at our schedule, but generally it's approved by BDD, and then the city approves it and the county approves it, and it's a whole thing because it's a unique entity. But the partners fund that regional facility as a wholesaler delivering water to the system.
So the CLA support is funded out of the cities, out of that
Well,
fund from the city
that's-
and the county. And
That's a good question because the city is the administrative, is on contract to administer the facility, and but again, I think those expenses are shared, correct?
okay.
Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett, yes. So in the case of the BDD expenditures, they're allocated out among the three partners based on a formula that I believe is related to the amount of water used
Yeah.
by each of the partners.
Yeah.
So the BDD expenses would follow the normal process for allocating out those costs to each of the partners.
Okay.
The amount that we've proposed to budget in public utilities for accounting consulting support is $1 million.
And that's from the enterprise funds.
Yes.
Okay. And then you mentioned for finance, you were really talking about the CLA being more of the special projects as opposed to accounting for audits. So are we going to still need to use CLA for audits? I know that there have been some, I believe there's been some internal changes that have been made within finance to help make sure that our audits stay on time, and that CLA's on other things. Am I understanding this correctly? And can you elaborate a little bit?
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett. So the current strategy with CLA is that we are having them continue with, kind of the current process to allow city staff to take the lead on those technology improvements that I was talking about. So for example, in the realm of capital assets, we want to implement the Munis capital assets functionality, but we can't stop what we're doing. We have to continue to maintain records related to capital assets in a system that we're using that CLA is maintaining. So the use of CLA in that area is they're providing the bandwidth to continue with the current process so that our city staff can focus on getting to the place where we want to be, which is having that information in Munis. So rather than dedicating city staff time to continuing with, the process that we have now, which isn't what we want it to be, we're leveraging our contract resources to continue that current process so that our staff resources can focus on implementing those new business processes and technology to get us to where we want to be in the future.
If I can, I think that's important for building the institutional knowledge to carry that work on without having to lean on an outside contractor.
And then have there been new positions that we've added or internal changes that, because we'd want to wean ourselves off. Like we've had, I know that there's so much that you all are doing in terms of changing these processes. And so making sure that the staff has the bandwidth, but curious what that looks like within the department and how that growth is looking. We do have some new positions coming in That's more capital budgeting, but.
Madam Chair and Councilor Cassett, in our case, it was really focused on filling existing positions and getting staff trained and getting the knowledge and tools that we need in order to be successful as city staff. We've added a couple of positions. There was one additional position that was added to the finance department last year, which was originally intended to focus on the administration of the excise tax on high-end home sales. Now that position, it exists, and that is our long-term plan, is to have that position administer that new tax program when it comes online. But in the interim, while we're, waiting for that position, that program to come online, we have utilized that position to focus on leases and on revenue accounting, which was an area where we knew we had a gap. So in terms of staffing up and reducing reliance on CLA, there has been, a little bit of growth in terms of number of positions, but it's really been primarily focused on filling the positions that we had and retaining those team members, getting them appropriate training, and building stability within the finance department, reducing turnover, and investing in our team so that they can be successful.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. I do have more questions. I will put myself on my own 10-minute rule and
that's-
allow other committee members to ask, and then we'll come back to me if they're not covered.
Thank you, Counselor. I think we should do the 10-minute rule, and my bad. I'm going to go to Counselor Faulkner.
So first I want to say thank you for everything you're doing in your department. I think it's one of the best run departments in the city. I think you're a great leader, and proof of that is your team and their satisfaction in their jobs and their willingness to learn and try different things. So I really appreciate you. One of the questions I have, really the only one, because most of mine got answered, to Councilor Cassett. In general, I'm not sure that I think we need to get rid of consultants altogether. I feel like that using consultants for some jobs saves the city money because we don't have the overhead of benefits packages. Is that a fair statement with CLA?
Madam Chair and Councilor Faulkner, thank you for that question. And yes, I will share, my opinion is I think there's probably always going to be a role in some capacity within city government for accounting consultants. One of the examples that I would give of that is implementation of new accounting standards. We have, an oversight board, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, and, in their infinite wisdom, they come up with new rules all the time. And frequently they're, hundreds of pages long, and they're very technical, and it takes a lot of investment to become an expert in what those new rules require. And firms like Clifton Larson Allen and, other firms that do this type of accounting consulting work, they can develop practice teams that become experts in those new accounting standards. And then they can guide us through the implementation of those standards. So we don't have to invest hundreds of hours of staff time into, learning every single requirement. So that's an area where I think, consultants can really save us a lot of time because they can develop those resources that can then be shared across many entities, and that expertise can be shared, which is much more efficient than each entity having to develop that in-house. And in a lot of cases, I would say it's not even possible for entities to find that kind of expertise and maintain it in-house. So in my opinion, Councilor Faulkner, I would certainly advocate for the city to issue an RFP to continue accounting professional services at some level. I think, looking for opportunities to decrease reliance on that resource in places where it makes sense, in places where we can fill positions and train city staff to do the work is absolutely a goal. But there certainly are some situations that I can think of where it may be more efficient to utilize contract resources.
Yeah, and I wanted to, before I go to other committee members, as long as we're on this point, I do think it's important to note that having the use of consultants is not a bad thing. As you've just said, it can sometimes be the efficient way to go. It can add value. You are not the only department utilizing consultants. And so I think there's been perhaps some unfair criticism that consultants are a bad thing. We've needed them because of our vacancies. We're trying to build the knowledge needed in our staff and to bring up the staffing levels. But as you point out, there are things that require our use of consultants, and that shouldn't be a mark against your department or any department. So I appreciate Counselor Faulkner bringing this up because I also wanted to talk about it. Other questions from the committee? Counselor Lindell.
I'll be quick. I think it's been an amazing year. I'm glad that we don't have the audit countdown clock run more. It all ran out. You know, I don't have anything specific to talk about with this budget. Just an overlying issue that I always have and that I have brought up before is I'm concerned with purchasing and you know, when we use contracts, what do we call the contracts where someone else has them and we tag on to them?
Madam Chair,
Pardon me?
Councilor Lindell, we sometimes refer to those as cooperative agreements, or when we do piggybacking, we utilize some.
Yeah, I'm just concerned that we, I know it's a mammoth amount of staff time and use, but I get concerned that we aren't getting the best price on things. And, you know, we use these price agreements that other entities and organizations have put in place. And I think it's easy for us. But I think that we could do better. And I think there's dollars to be saved. And perhaps, you know, that's a new process that could at least be considered on some very high dollar contracts that we do, like purchasing police cars. Maybe we need to price those out ourselves. So those are my comments, Chair. Thank you.
Counselor Lee Garcia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Director. And I too want to thank you for your hard work. Developing a team is not easy. Developing a team that has the same vision and mission, and it comes from the leadership. And so I do commend you for that. And I know you stepped into a very difficult situation, and I believe that through support of others and leadership gives you the reins to do that. Sometimes holding people accountable is very difficult, but at the same time, I truly believe that we are here in this position because of your great leadership, and not only that of other administrators giving you support and even holding you accountable, because that's very important. I did want to touch base a little bit, and I think I've made this very clear in past discussions in regards to fully staffing versus contracting. We don't need both, and I do appreciate that you have brought this to the table in regards to, you know, we don't need the full funding for outside resources. But it is very intelligent and smart that we don't, we still have to have that lifeline when we need it. And a prime example would be in a private business when you use consultants for specialty situations. Same thing of what you've just explained. You know, in my business, I don't handle my own payroll, because if I had somebody doing my own payroll, that person leaves, I don't have another person to do it. So you need that specialty person to be able to handle it, as long as they are credible and they are good. And it seems as if our partners with CLA has been good, and it has been very beneficial to our situation, especially having to do so much catch-up work. And so mostly comments. I do appreciate how hard you have worked in finding people to supplement within the departments. And I know it's a difficult task because of the job market that's out there and competition that's out there. And, again, it is very important that we do as much as we can internally, because I believe when you work on that hard dollar, it doesn't cost as much as supplementing in exterior through contractors. And so those are mostly my comments. I don't really have many more questions. Thank you to your team and all the work that you have put in to bring this budget forward. As I have expressed in the past, full transparency, that's what people want. They want to see what we're doing, how we're spending their money, because at the end of the day, it's taxpayers' dollars that we're responsible for being responsible for. And I think that's we hear that time and time again, whether it's why is my street not repaved? I mean, when is it going to happen? Why are we bonding? I mean, don't we have money in the budget to do this? Where is it going? And that's where the full transparency of whether it's the budget or what we're expending and how we're utilizing these funds is very important. So again, I do appreciate your work and I look forward to going through the rest of the days here and collaborating with everyone in the departments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Counselor Cassett, did you have other questions?
I have two more and I'll try to be speedy as speedy can be. Thank you. I was just looking at the tables, and there's the transfer to other funds, and I saw that there was a big increase there. I know we've talked about transfer to the funds, not sure if this is related, but I was curious about that increase specifically in the finance department and which funds are they going to? Why do they go to those funds, and just understanding that increase a bit more.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councillor Cassett. At a high level, I can tell you that, as the city manager mentioned in his opening remarks, there was a change in methodology for how we're accounting for transfers. That's reflected in this budget, and it in this year only, it affects those year-over-year comparisons. So I see what you're seeing there, and I agree, it looks like a very substantial change. And it really reflects that change in methodology. If you'd like more specific detail, I'm happy to invite our budget team up here to walk through that. But I would just kind of say that this is something that's probably going to come up in more departments rather than just the finance committee. And when you're looking at those percentages of year over year, and I meant the finance department, excuse me, sorry. When you're looking at those year over year percentage changes, you're going to see some significant fluctuations, which really reflect the implementation of that change in the way we're accounting for transfers, rather than an actual change in, for example, in this case, the finance department itself.
Okay, so that was part of that earlier conversation around essentially things are now going to the general fund as opposed to being transferred from somewhere else directly to another department. And I know like affordable housing was mentioned, economic development.
I think maybe, if I can, Counselor, it might not be a bad idea just to spend a minute on the change in methodology, if we're prepared to do that, or we can do a placeholder and ask for a little bit more specificity in that change. Is that change something that our new city manager is asking for? Is that a change being dictated upon us? Is it in response to audits? And again, if you all need time to pull that together, or if that's something you can pull off top of your head, great. Welcome, Mr. Hopkins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Councilor Cassett, there's two things going on here. In the case of finance, specifically, that increase is actually shown in the budget office. The budget office has a code that is in the capital GRT fund. Knowing that we would have a large amount of funding that we would have to subsidize in funds that require a subsidy, principal among them would be things like the MRC fund, the GCC fund, transit, economic development, Southside Library, and there's a few others that need smaller subsidies, such as the Human Services Fund. However, the reason that you're seeing a large increase in budget is not actually related to the general fund per se. We knew that we would have a large amount that we would have to subsidize in other funds. One of the things that we do in that process first is we say, what can we subsidize from Fund 365, which is the capital GRT fund, because it has a larger fund availability. That fund is restricted to debt service and capital outlay. So basically knowing that we would have a really tough row to hoe to get everything subsidized correctly, we essentially in subsidized funds, including actually the police special revenue fund, we took everything that we legally could out of that 365 fund to cover debt and capital. Then the remainder would have to come from the general fund. Even with that maximization and the large increase you see in finance because of the capital transfers, that's still only probably around only about 10%, maybe 20% max of the amount that has to be subsidized. All these other funds, it's really quite a lot of money. You'll actually see the greater amount of the subsidy if you see, and I can't remember what page it is in the budget book. Let's see, it's in the executive summary page. Second.
The executive summary is on page 8.
It's the table on page 20 of the budget book. If you see the transfers out there, I don't have my glasses with me, but you'll see that there's a large increase in general fund transfers out. Now that's different. Like I said, the transfers out of the capital GRT showing up in finance, that is different. This amount in the general fund, this amount in the general fund is the methodology change that the city manager was referring to earlier. In the past, we've had not just to take subsidies from the general fund itself, but from other funds like the dedicated GRT fund, which is 216. The GRT in that fund is dedicated to transit quality of life, rail yard debt service, and the GCC. Per the ordinances, any amounts that are not strictly required from that fund can go to the general fund. In the past, we've kind of skipped the middleman and taken part of the subsidies directly from that 216 fund to the fund that needed it, say the Economic Development Fund. In this case, because that caused some confusion, even to us, and also because of the strict wording of the ordinance that says that amounts not needed in that 216 fund can be reverted to the general fund, we thought better of it and said, okay, let's take all that money that we're going to need from 216 for the subsidy, put it in the general fund first, and then subsidize out from the general fund. That has two effects. One, it makes us, strictly more complying with the letter of the ordinance, or ordinances, I should say, but also it really clarifies for us a lot more easily how much is the subsidy for such and such a fund. Where does that subsidy come from? If it's all coming from one place, it's a lot easier to call out and a lot easier to track, if that makes sense.
That does. Thank you. What's the score? Okay. Not that I'm paying attention, but I heard sports happen. That does. Thank you, Andy. I do appreciate that.
And just to conclude, that's why you see that $13.3 million increase in general fund transfers out on page 20.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yep.
Before you go away and before we leave this topic, and we're likely only to see this this time? It's a one-time thing, or we're going to see this moving forward?
Madam Chair, no, you will see this going forward. Since I've been here for 23 years, there have been funds that are not self-sufficient that require a significant general fund subsidy. I don't see unless the council agrees to significant self-supporting revenue sources for things like the general or for things like economic development, things like affordable housing, things like the municipal recreation complex. Those funds will always require millions of dollars in subsidy.
Okay, I'm going to go to Mr. Scott here.
When we talk about one time, this is the only year where the comparison from one year to the other will be in different accounting styles.
Okay, I think that's what there's something here that's different that we're not going to see again, but how we're doing this accounting, moving it to the general fund and then going to the fund that needs it, that's the methodology that's going to carry forward. But these percentage differences, we're only going to see this huge difference in this year.
Madam Chair, that's correct. Yeah, the money will continue to be there in the same place, but the over/under change year to year will go down next year.
Right. Okay. Because this is the first year we're implementing this.
Madam Chair, that's correct. We've always done some of the subsidies from the general fund, but it was kind of piecemeal from this fund and that fund and that fund over there. This year we're centralizing it all in the general fund for clarity and again because of the strict wording of the ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. And back to you, Councillor Cassett. Thanks for indulging my questions.
Last topic, thank you. I did want to go over the conversation around vacancy fees and how we balance our vacancy savings. What are they called? Vacancy credits? Vacancy credits. But we haven't frozen positions, correct? We've calculated in heavy vacancy savings as part of this budget. My understanding.
Madam Chair and Councillor Cassett, so there is a vacancy credit built into the proposed budget, and there are some positions that have been defunded, essentially, not in the finance department, but in other departments. So I think it's important that we be upfront about that, and that was a necessary step in order to fund the 3% across the board increase that's being proposed for city staff. Now, the positions that have been frozen or temporarily defunded have been vacant for at least 2 years. All of the positions that were affected by that or are proposed to be affected by that have been vacant for at least 2 years.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then I'm assuming we'll get to those when we get to those departments. So forgive me, but while we have you guys here, I do enjoy just kind of understanding things that I hear a lot about that I don't fully understand. And so in terms of salaries, I'm guessing that when we do a vacancy saving, are we calculating it at the mid-range? I mean, when we fund positions, especially since we have such a tight budget this year, I'm curious where that budget kind of line is. I'm not sure if we fund position by position. And then I know this is often a conversation with other staff around when they're trying to hire, they want to hire at the high end of the salary range. They're not able to do that. And I'm still trying to understand this process better. So I see Anita already coming up as the expert here. So I just love to understand a bit more about the balances that we have to make, what this starts to look like and what this challenge is, especially since I know that vacancy credits are factoring in kind of big this year.
If you don't mind, just tilt that mic up so to capture you. Thank you.
I'm not sure it's on. We'll be able to see you if it is.
So we bring them in year to year at what it is budgeted at that point. So if somebody leaves, whatever the budget amount is, we try and bring it in at that same amount if it's vacant. When it is filled, we bring it in at the filled budgeted amount that is there. That is how that process works. So through the 3 years that I've been here, one of the processes that I ask departments to do is really start looking at your budget now. And if there's factors that we have to take into account where we're bringing vacant positions up to a mid or max amount or somewhere within, they should start working on that immediately. Sometimes they just don't have the budget to support it. So we try our very best to help them. They have to budget within their own budget. So if they're looking for something to bring somebody in higher, they have to give us where that funding is coming from. And then we're able to support that. We have created forms that help them easily do that in creating what the amount's going to be for salary and benefit. So when we're looking at just salaries, and many departments, when they're asking these questions, are like, well, it's only $4. It's not. Benefits actually could cost quite a bit. So we came up with a form. It's the salary analysis form. They tell us where that's coming from. Is it coming from another position? Is it coming from another recurring funding source that they have? That will allow them to support and decrease in another area to increase in salary.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. That does help clarify that a lot. And it does remind land use. I know did that a couple of years ago with their planners. They got rid of some of their contracts and
Yes.
were able to increase their senior planners.
This year, Public Works has worked really hard with transit, getting positions frozen internally and making sure that they could bring transit driver 2 and 3 up to a better cost. And so they worked really hard on getting transit drivers on the road so that we have, less services.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the edification for me. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Counselor Faulkner?
I may have missed that when I went to the restroom. It's gone now. Lost my train of thought.
Well, I have a question, so maybe it'll come back. So we had testimony earlier that the aggressiveness in this vacancy credits to fund the budget was being used to fund the administration's priorities, I think was maybe how it was put. But I guess I want to, and I think the city manager, I think earlier spoke about the balance between, we have these funded positions. We really want to fund the vacancies. We need the vacancies to do the work, but sometimes we're not able to. And in this budget, we're having to, I guess, defund some of these positions, but also really count on the fact that there are certain positions we're not going to be able to hire. And somebody just mentioned that the big reason we're doing that is to fund the 3% increase. That is the reason we are being aggressive in this. Can somebody just confirm that that is the driving factor behind this vacancy, how we are being aggressive with vacancy credits? I think that's a really important point to acknowledge, that what this is doing is, again, investing in our workforce, our people, that make the city run. And I just want to underline, underscore, exclamation point, if that's the case, which you're nodding your head. So I think I'm correct.
Madam Chair, yes, that is correct. So the prioritization of an across-the-board increase for city staff required some trade-offs. And, as we've been talking about, there are risks and opportunities in every budgeting process. So, one of the trade-offs that we're proposing as part of this FY26 budget is that we would reallocate the recurring general fund dollars that were attached to chronically vacant positions that have been vacant for more than 2 years, and utilize that funding to cover the costs of 3% across the board pay increase for funded positions, which are positions that have been filled in the last 2 years, including all current currently filled positions.
I see the city manager reaching for his green button.
Madam Chair, that's entirely the right answer. I just wanted to say that we've also said to department directors who are affected by that, that as opportunities come up during the course of the year or need comes up, that we need to fill any of those positions. I don't want them to think that they don't have that opportunity. It's just that we will have to deal with how we find other trade-offs in order to do that. Now, all that then gets exacerbated by the concerns about GRT. And so that's why I keep saying we're going to need to revisit this probably pretty soon to make sure that we're on the right path. But we're freezing some positions, but we're not closing the door that if there's need that they can raise those and find different trade-offs.
Okay, and in your presentation, Mr. Scott, you mentioned a couple of those areas where you've promised those directors. Can you just maybe, because now I think that we're in the moment of having this conversation now that becomes, I think, more relevant information or better understood information. So I think you suggested that in parks was one.
I think that the parks discussion is very significant, and I felt bad that we didn't find a way to at least include the contract services administrator that they were looking for. I think that was high need.
Right, that was one you mentioned, and there were a
Court-
couple others.
Court was the other one.
Court, okay.
And the court, I think we just scrubbed too hard.
Mm-hmm.
Different judge, different time. One of the items we scrubbed was a contract which had been used for a landscaping project. And he's saying, well, last year I used it for a landscaping project, and now this year it got removed because we finished it, but it had been taken out of another budget line where he had not done something that he needed to do for a whole year. And he said, I need that money back. And after we'd studied it and we both studied it, we thought, yeah, we overscrubbed that line. We'll need to find a trade-off on that.
Okay, so those are a couple of areas. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know everybody's kind of chomping at the bit because you've been at this for a while. I just wanted to take the opportunity to put this in a slightly higher level of consideration when it comes to thinking about positions funded, unfunded, created, frozen. And I think it is hard to talk about freezing positions because everybody wants to have everything funded always. But I think there's a potential budgeting philosophical opportunity here. Maybe not this year, but in the future. We've been struggling for some time to put positions where they're needed and to take them from where they're not being used. And it's a struggle because in our government, as long as I've been a part of it, positions are treated as the scarcest, most treasured commodity on earth, right? If you have it, don't ever give it up. And I think we need to, over time, with a start this year, begin to think differently about positions as something you hoard even if you don't fill them, or that you can't afford to give up because you'll never see them again. And I would encourage everybody on the governing body to take a more fluid and nuanced attitude toward positions, that any department head should at any time, because our budget can be changed at any time, should be encouraged to bring to the governing body a really important request for a new position, rather than treating it as a forbidden fruit or you're breaking a vow or you're somehow out of order. On the other hand, I would encourage department heads to give up a position if they're not using it. Ultimately, we need to get the city government. I've said this in past budget years. We're not trying to downsize the city government. We're not trying to right-size the city government. We're trying to reshape it so the positions are in the places where the priorities are, so the most important work gets done in the judgment of the members of the governing body. And so while this is in this year's budget, the position chill is being done in order to find the dollars that I think we all will ultimately agree are best served as yet another pay increase to be competitive in a tough job market. That doesn't preclude thinking differently about the moving of positions, the creation of positions, the giving up of positions if they're really not being productively used. In order for that department heads to feel they can do that, they need to hear from members of the governing body this year and in years future that positions are not impossible to get if you really have a strong case that says this is really important for the people of Santa Fe. And I think we need to begin changing that attitude with this budget. And I think it's an opportunity.
Counselor Faulkner.
So one of the questions I have is, well, a concern. It's difficult the way the budget's presented to us currently to be able to make those decisions, know where to get the money from, how to even suggest to make the decisions. And so I know City Manager Mr. Scott has pledged, I know, to me and to Carol and Jamie, I'm pretty certain that we are going to work on doing a different budget process, because this has been one of the more frustrating parts of being a city councilor, is that, the executive promulgates the budget, but we have some oversight and have to weigh in on the budget that has been impossible to do so because we don't even know what it is. And so I'm looking forward to those changes. I think it'll be really good to build trust between the people of the city, city council and the executive branch. I think it's a really smart move and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Counselor. And I think, I have spoken with the city manager and the mayor and you, Counselor, about, and Counselor Cassett about coming up with a different budget process that begins earlier, that involves the finance committee. Also, I think we've talked a lot about the Questica software coming online and the benefits that it will bring to our both oversight and ability to budget in a different way, with more information and possibly the ability to weigh in on the trade-offs that are being made in more impactful ways. So yeah, and I got to say, getting to that moment was highly dependent on the work of getting the audits done so that we're dealing with real numbers. And, this is something that I've been very antsy about for a long time, wanting to make improvements, but I've really had to be patient while the hard work of getting the audits done was taking place. And so again, very grateful that that work has been done, that we're on cycle, because there's more to be done. There's more improvements that we can make that I think will make us all feel better. So, all right. Anything else on this budget? I think so we've typically voted on these budgets. I think, I just want to say that what we're doing here is sort of a preliminary approval. If we want to continue down that path, we do vote on the overall budget once we've heard everything. So, if we want to continue with that tradition, that's the way we've always done it, is we vote on the budgets as they come in front of us. Unless there's an issue that we want to work on, and then we might wait a day or something, bring somebody back if there's not enough information. But I think it's, we're making a preliminary approval, and then we approve the whole thing as a recommendation from the finance committee to the governing body. And that comes after we've heard everybody. So, We want to make a preliminary approval of this budget. I think I am.
I'll second with a quick question.
Sure.
I know that this is part of that conversation that we
Yep.
just had about Questica, about our ability to understand what's going on and make suggestions and changes. If we do a preliminary approval of, and this goes for any budget, if we do a preliminary approval, does it, kind of, I guess if we are going to do the overall budget approval at that point, if we had a preliminary approved a budget, that would be an opportunity that we might make some shifts.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Then I'm happy to second.
Okay, other discussion on this? If not, I think we've historically,
Roll call.
I think historically we've done a roll call.
All right, thank you. Counselor Cassett,
Yes.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Faulkner,
Yes.
Counselor Lee Garcia,
Yes.
Chair Merriworth.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Oster, for your presentation. Thank you to your team. Really appreciate it. All right, with that is the only budget that we are hearing today. And we've been here for 3 hours straight. I apologize. We will be taking lunch in the future. Our next meeting is tomorrow morning, and remind me, 10 o'clock. And if there's nothing else, we're adjourned.